That afternoon, the quiet street of Greenwood Hills sat under a dull, heavy sky. A simple two-story house stood beside a line of oak trees. It wasn't rich or run down, just an ordinary home that once echoed with joy when Dr. Grace Miller was alive. She had cared deeply for her work and even more for her little daughter. But since her death just 10 days earlier, the house felt empty and cold, as if every bit of warmth had disappeared with her. At the old brown wooden gate, a heartbreaking scene was unfolding. 6-year-old Maddie Donovan stood there with tangled blonde hair, a dirty pink dress, and worn-out shoes. She held a faded blue backpack in her arms. Her eyes were swollen and red, her lips shaking as she begged. Standing in front of her was Frank Donovan, a man in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, and visibly annoyed. His wrinkled white shirt was half hanging out, and his jeans were old and faded. He had been Grace's second husband and Maddie's stepfather in name only. To him, Maddie was never his child. Next to him stood Fiona Blake, a woman around 28. Her brown hair was curled perfectly, her makeup neatly done, and she wore a tight red floral dress that showed off her figure. She had once been Frank's secret lover, but now she walked around openly as if the house belonged to her. Her smile was smug, and her eyes were full of disdain as she stared at the little girl. Frank snapped, his tone full of anger. "Get out of here right now. You're nothing but trouble. I don't want to see you again." Maddie dropped to her knees, crying as she pleaded. "Please don't send me away. I'll behave, I'll do the chores, just let me stay." Fiona let out a cruel laugh and bent down slightly, her sharp voice filled with scorn. "Look at you, dirty dress, messy hair. You think someone like Grace had a daughter like this? That woman was perfect. She would never leave behind such a pathetic child." The words hit Maddie like a blow. She held on tightly to her backpack and lowered her head as tears dripped onto the dusty ground. The wooden gate slammed shut behind her, like a final goodbye to the only home she knew. Frank stepped forward without a hint of emotion and shoved her hard on the shoulder. She stumbled and fell onto the rough ground. Her knees were scraped and bleeding, her small hands scratched and raw. The backpack slipped from her grip and burst open, worn notebooks and a tiny stuffed bear scattered across the dirt. Fiona stood with her arms folded, a twisted smile spreading across her face as if she were enjoying every second of it. "Get out before I really lose my patience," Frank barked. Maddie tried to get up, her hands shaking as she hurried to collect her belongings. Her shaky voice broke between sobs. "I don't have anywhere to go. Please, Dad." Her words only deepened Fiona's smirk. "Did you hear that, Frank? She still thinks you're her father. Pathetic." Just outside the gate, the quiet was cut by the soft purr of a luxury engine. A sleek black Bugatti slowed to a stop as the driver caught sight of the scene. The window lowered, revealing a man in his 30s with neatly trimmed hair and a sharp gray suit, Jonathan Reed. A successful businessman, widowed 3 years earlier after losing his wife to cancer, he was simply heading home from a meeting. He never imagined stumbling upon something like this. Jonathan's brows drew together. He spoke quickly to the driver. "Stop the car." He stepped out, the leather soles of his shoes brushing the dirt. His eyes immediately locked onto the trembling little girl with the blonde hair and tear-streaked face, clutching the worn backpack as though it was the only thing she had left. In her red, swollen eyes, he saw something that struck him deep inside, like a memory trying to surface. Frank turned with an irritated look. "Who the hell are you? This has nothing to do with you. I'm disciplining my disrespectful, ungrateful daughter." Jonathan ignored him. He walked straight to Maddie, crouched down, and gently helped her to her feet. The moment his hand touched her arm, she clung to him with shaking fingers, as though she'd found the only safe place left in the world. He looked at her face more closely, something tightening painfully in his chest. His voice came out quiet, almost carried away by the wind. "These eyes. I've seen them before." Something in him shifted. As the gate behind them shut with a heavy thud, it felt like the last piece of her past sealing itself away. An old thought stirred in his mind, and a sudden feeling told him that this moment was not a coincidence. Frank stomped closer, his face burning with anger. He planted his hands on his hips and spat out, "Get out of here! You don't get to walk in and talk big in my house. You think a fancy suit gives you the right to meddle? This girl is trash I'm throwing out. Who are you to interfere?" Jonathan stood, holding Maddie securely in his arms. His eyes turned icy as he stared straight at Frank. "What did you just do to this child? Do you feel nothing? She's your daughter, isn't she?" Frank let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Daughter? I never asked to carry Grace's ghost around. That kid is nothing but the baggage Grace Miller left behind." The mention of that name stopped Jonathan cold. Grace Miller. His heart jolted, and the past flickered in his mind like a light turning back on. His heart jolted, and old memories surged back as if a light had suddenly flicked on after years of darkness. He couldn't stop them. Grace Miller, the dedicated doctor who had cared for his wife, Anna, in her final days. Her calm presence, her steady voice, and the warmth in her eyes had carried his family through the worst time of their lives. He hadn't confirmed whether Maddie was truly her child, but the pounding in his chest felt like an answer he couldn't ignore. The moment Maddie heard her mother's name spoken with contempt, fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. She hugged her backpack tighter and choked out, "Please, don't talk about my mother like that." Fiona stepped forward, lips painted red, a nasty smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. Her gaze slid past Jonathan and landed on Maddie like she was a piece of trash on the curb. "How entertaining," she said coldly. "A random man stops his car and suddenly thinks he's a savior. You have no idea what kind of child that is. That thing only causes problems." Jonathan didn't respond right away. His expression darkened, and for a moment he simply stood there in silence. Then, without another word, he bent down and lifted Maddie gently into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his shoulder instantly, clinging to him as if she feared that letting go would mean being thrown out again. David Collins, Jonathan's longtime driver, a kind, soft-spoken man in his 50s, hurried out of the car. He opened the back door, concern on his face. "Sir, what's happening?" he asked quietly. Jonathan shook his head, his voice steady and firm. "Nothing. This child is coming with us." Frank lurched forward as if to grab Jonathan's arm, but the icy stare Jonathan gave him made him stop in his tracks. Fiona tugged at Frank's sleeve and muttered just loudly enough, "Let that maniac take her. That useless child isn't worth our time. If he wants to haul her away, it only saves us trouble." Jonathan didn't glance back. He carried Maddie to the car and carefully placed her in the back seat. David helped buckle her in, his expression gentle and reassuring. When Jonathan got in beside her, he could still feel the faint tremor in his fingers. Maddie sat silently with the blue backpack pressed to her chest, staring out the window as if one blink might throw her back into the nightmare she'd just escaped. The car pulled away. Inside, no one spoke. Jonathan looked into the rearview mirror and saw Frank and Fiona still standing at the gate, Frank biting his lip in anger, Fiona smirking like she'd won something. Jonathan inhaled slowly, forcing down the rage simmering in his chest. A flash of memory struck him. His son, Alex, curled up in a car seat after his mother's funeral, small and quiet and lost. That day, Jonathan had vowed never to let anyone hurt his child again. And now, that same fierce protectiveness rose inside him, but this time, for a little girl he didn't even know. He reached over, took the soft blanket resting on the seat, and draped it around Maddie's shoulders. His voice was calm, reassuring. "You're safe now. No one will put you out on the street again." Maddie bit down on her lip, her eyes filling even though she held back the tears. Her hands clenched around the backpack straps as if her life depended on it. Her voice trembled in the quiet car. I don't have a home anymore." Jonathan's hand froze in place, the words hitting him like a punch to the chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, tightening his fist as pain and resolve rose together inside him. Jonathan's hand froze halfway, his fingers stiffening. Her words struck him like a heavy blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. He closed his eyes, tightened his fist, and a mix of pain and determination rose inside him. In that moment, he knew, his life would no longer be the same. The car continued down the narrow road, leaving the dim streetlights behind. Inside, Maddie sat with her head lowered, clutching her blue backpack with both hands as if it were the last thing she owned. Jonathan sat quietly beside her, glancing her way now and then. He didn't press her with questions. He simply gave her silence and room to breathe while her tears slowly faded from exhaustion. Nearly an hour later, the car turned onto the long private road leading into Roxbury, where Jonathan lived. Through the window, tall iron gates opened, revealing a large three-story mansion in the distance, grand, pale stone, and surrounded by towering trees. To most, it would have looked like safety and comfort, but to Maddie, it was unfamiliar and intimidating. The car stopped at the front steps. The door opened, and a woman in her early 50s hurried outside. It was Helen Carter, the longtime housekeeper who had served Jonathan's family for many years. She wore a dark sweater, her frame slim but her gaze steady and observant. She paused the moment she saw Maddie, surprise flashing briefly before she composed herself and bowed slightly. "Mr. Reed, you're home." Her eyes moved to the child, and her voice softened with uncertainty. "And this girl?" Jonathan gave a small nod. He lifted Maddie gently from the car and set her down at the top of the steps. "This is Maddie," he said. "Starting today, she'll be staying here." Helen didn't ask anything more. She only nodded and looked at the child with quiet sympathy and curiosity. As the front door opened, a boy stood just inside the hall waiting. Alex Reed, 8 years old, Jonathan's only son. His brown hair was tidy, his blue eyes sharp and guarded. His arms were crossed, and there was a hint of annoyance in his expression as he saw his father walk in with a stranger. "Who is this girl?" Alex asked flatly, suspicion in his tone. "Why did you bring her here?" Jonathan rested a steady hand on his son's shoulder and kept his voice calm. "She needs a safe place," he said. "Do you remember how much you shook the day your mother died? She feels the same way you did then." Alex's lips pressed together, pain flickering in his eyes. His fists clenched as he muttered, "But I don't need anyone else. I only need Mom, and she's never coming back." Maddie stepped back without thinking, her heart pounding. She hugged her backpack closer and edged toward the wall, too scared to make a sound. She couldn't fully grasp their conversation, but she could feel the tension in every breath. Though Maddie didn't fully understand their conversation, she could feel it. She was being shut out again. Jonathan turned toward her, his expression softening. He reached out gently, but Maddie flinched and lowered her head, too afraid to meet his eyes. Helen stepped in quickly, crouching beside the girl. Her voice was low and warm. "Don't be scared, child. Come inside. You'll be safe here." Maddie gave the slightest nod, tears still clinging to her lashes. Jonathan looked to his son. His voice was calm but firm. "Alex, we'll talk later." Then he turned to Helen. "Please get a room ready for her." Helen nodded and carefully led Maddie down the hall. Alex remained where he was, his eyes dark and unreadable. His hands curled into fists at his sides, as if holding back a storm he didn't know how to name. Night settled over the house, and silence followed. In the room Helen had prepared, Maddie sat stiffly on the edge of the bed, still clutching her blue backpack. She didn't dare open it. Every creak and footstep outside made her tense. The room was clean and quiet, but to her, it felt like unfamiliar territory, like she might be sent away at any moment. Out in the hallway, warm light spilled across the floor, casting long shadows. Jonathan stood by the door, watching through the slight opening. The small shape on the bed, curled up, motionless, stirred something heavy inside him. He stepped into the room and sat at the edge of the mattress. "Do you want me to hold your backpack so I can wash your clothes?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Maddie shook her head, gripping it tighter. "No. I don't need that. I can do it myself." Jonathan didn't argue. He simply stayed nearby until her breathing slowed and sleep finally took her. Only then did he carefully slide the backpack from her arms and set it on the desk. He unzipped it quietly. Inside were a few worn notebooks, a small stuffed bear faded with age, and, tucked at the bottom, a thick medical record file. When he opened it, his eyes stopped on the first page. The name written there was clear and familiar. Dr. Grace Miller. Jonathan's heartbeat stuttered. For a moment, he couldn't move. That name struck him like a forgotten echo from another life. His mind pulled at memories long buried, and the realization hit with quiet force. This child was not a coincidence. He closed the file carefully, his hands unsteady, and stepped back into the hallway. The house was still. The soft golden light stretched across the carpet as he passed the guest rooms. He paused outside Maddie's door, ready to leave for the night, when he heard it. Muffled sobs. Small, Broken sounds. Maddie was talking in her sleep, her voice barely a breath. "Mom. I'm sorry. Please don't go." Jonathan rested his hand against the doorframe, his chest tightening with each word. Through the narrow gap, he saw her curled up again, fingers gripping the pillow, her shoulders shaking with silent tremors. Tears soaked the fabric under her cheek. He leaned against the frame, not entering the room, letting the ache in his chest match hers. A quiet whisper escaped him, more a vow than a sound. "You won't have to." Jonathan remained by the doorway for a long moment before finally stepping away. The soft, broken sounds of Maddie's sleep-muted cries stayed with him, etched into his heart like a scar. He walked to the living room and sat down, the medical record still in his hand. The name printed on the cover, Dr. Grace Miller, echoed through his mind, stirring memories he thought he had buried long ago. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. The past rose up like an old film playing in the dark. 3 years earlier, when his wife Anna was in the final stage of cancer, the person who stood with them through every painful moment was Grace Miller. She wasn't just Anna's doctor, she was a steady, compassionate presence. He still remembered the first time they met. Grace had looked him straight in the eyes and said with quiet strength, "I will take care of her as if she were my own family." Back then, Jonathan was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but those words lit a tiny spark of comfort in him. One bitter winter afternoon, Anna's pain had become unbearable. Her skin was pale, her lips dry, her breath strained. Grace adjusted her medication with gentle focus and then stayed by her bedside, holding her hand. Jonathan sat near the head of the bed, watching the woman he loved fade more each day. Anna slowly turned to him. Even through the haze of morphine and suffering, her eyes still held warmth. Her voice was weak but urgent. "If one day Grace's daughter ever needs help, please protect her for me. I hope that little girl's smile never disappears." Jonathan could not speak. He just bent down and held his wife's trembling hand, swallowing the pain in his throat. He never imagined those words would come back to him 3 years later, like fate had simply been waiting. He opened his eyes and looked again at the medical record, his chest heavy. Was this really the child Anna had asked him to protect? Had destiny placed Maddie in his path for a reason? He rose from his chair and walked to the small library at the end of the hall. It was a room Anna had loved, where she used to read bedtime stories to Alex. He knelt by the old wooden cabinet and began pulling open the drawers one by one. His hands shook as he sifted through old papers and books. At last, a thin envelope slipped out from between 2 worn novels, coated in a fine layer of dust. His breath caught when he saw the handwriting on the front. Soft, familiar, unmistakably Anna's. "To Jonathan." He opened it slowly. The paper was slightly yellowed with time, but her presence seemed to breathe through every line. "If you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer by your side. I know you will go on living for Alex, and for yourself, but there is something I want to tell you. I once met Grace's little daughter, a girl with blonde hair, clear eyes, and an innocent smile. I don't know why, but in that moment, I felt as if I were seeing Alex in another mirror. If one day that little girl needs protection, I hope you will not turn away. Please give her the chance to grow up in love and safety. Please keep that smile shining forever on my behalf." Jonathan folded the letter, his hands still trembling. He turned toward the window. A faint light slipped through the thin curtains of Maddie's room. The image of the little girl with messy blonde hair, tear-streaked cheeks, and arms wrapped around a blue backpack overlapped with the memory of his wife's words. A sharp ache pierced his chest. Painful, but suddenly unmistakable. He whispered hoarsely, "She is the child from back then, Anna. I found her again." His voice trembled as he finally allowed himself to believe that Maddie was the very girl Anna had once spoken of, the child she had asked him to protect. Jonathan closed the drawer and set Anna's letter alongside the medical record bearing Grace's name. He turned off the light in the study and stepped into the hallway. At the top of the stairs, Alex stood leaning against the banister, hands in his pockets, eyes tense and guarded. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, "you're replacing Mom. Do you really think some strange kid can fill that empty place?" Jonathan stopped, breathing slowly to keep his tone steady. "No one can ever replace your mother. But I can't turn my back on her, just as I never turned my back on you." Alex bit his lip and looked away. "I hate having to share you with anyone else." Jonathan stepped closer, resting his hand on the railing. His voice was calm but unwavering. "I think about your mother every single day. That's exactly why I understand what it feels like to be abandoned. You don't have to share my love, only a home, with a child who is trembling the same way you once did." Alex swallowed hard. He went downstairs, poured himself a glass of water, then returned to the study doorway. "I can't promise I'll like her. But I won't scare her. I want you to know that I'm hurting." "I know," Jonathan said quietly. "And I'm here." At the corner of the hallway, Maddie pressed herself against the built-in cabinet, clutching her blue backpack. She had heard every word. Her heart pulled tight, a sudden thought flashing across her mind. If I leave, maybe they'll all feel better. Just then, Martha walked by carrying a stack of towels. She caught the lost look in Maddie's eyes but didn't pry. Instead, she handed her a clean towel and said gently, "If your backpack feels too heavy, you can leave it in your room, sweetheart. No one here is telling you to go anywhere." Maddie nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Martha turned on the living room light. "If you can't sleep, sit and read a few pages with me. Go back to your room whenever you're ready." Maddie sat on the edge of a chair, her feet not touching the floor, her hands gripping the towel. She didn't dare cry. She only tried to breathe evenly so a sob wouldn't break free. Back in the study, Jonathan took out Anna's letter again and read it as if drawing strength from the ink itself. The responsibility resting on his shoulders felt heavy, but for the first time, also certain. He whispered a promise to the quiet room, sealing it like a vow. "No matter what, the girl will be safe here." Just then, the landline rang. Jonathan lifted the phone. "Mr. Reed, is that you?" "This is Clara Benson, the neighbor across from Dr. Grace's house. I'm sorry to call so late, but the elderly—" The woman's voice trembled slightly, but it was steady enough to be heard. Jonathan straightened, placing a hand on the desk to steady himself. "Yes. I'm listening, Mrs. Benson." "I saw you carry the little girl into your car this afternoon," she said, taking a deep breath. "My kitchen window faces the wooden gate. My doorbell has a camera. It recorded everything. I noted the time, and I captured images of the man in the white shirt and the young woman in the red dress." Jonathan froze for a moment. "Why are you calling me? Why trust me?" "I know who you are," Clara continued, her voice steadier now. "You were in the papers for the Bright Futures Foundation. You helped my old school. I saw the small logo sticker on your car window. And there's another reason. Dr. Grace once treated me for free at the community clinic. She was kind. I owe her." Jonathan stayed silent, listening to her calm, deliberate breathing on the other end. "Do you want to help Maddie?" she asked. "I tried to endure it." Just 10 days after the funeral, that young woman moved in. Since then, the girl has been forced to do chores, often left outside the gate late at night, arms and legs scratched. "I brought cookies once, but Mr. Frank yelled at me. I'm a retired elementary school teacher. I know the signs of abuse. I've kept notes, saved the videos. I thought contacting you would be safer for the child than confronting him directly." Jonathan gripped the receiver, lowering his voice. "Can you send the recordings to me, and to the police?" "I already made copies," she replied firmly. "I'm ready to testify. I can't stay silent any longer." She paused, then spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "One more thing, Mr. Reed. Grace's death wasn't an accident." Jonathan sat upright, his heart pounding, but his voice stayed calm. "Why do you say that?" "I heard arguments the day before the accident," Clara explained. "I saw Mr. Frank take the car in for brake work, then return it very quickly. On the day Grace died, he disappeared for hours, then returned as if nothing happened. I'll tell you everything in person, but please, keep the girl with you tonight." Jonathan looked down the hallway, where the living room light fell softly across Maddie's blonde hair. He spoke slowly, as if making a vow. "She will stay here. Tomorrow morning, I'll come see you." "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm only doing what Dr. Grace once did for us," Clara said, a faint sigh escaping her lips. Then the line went dead. Jonathan set the receiver down, heart heavy but resolved. He opened the desk drawer and placed Anna's letter and Grace's medical record on top, two guiding hands to help him find the path forward. In the living room, Martha closed her book and whispered to Maddie, "Go to sleep, child. Tomorrow will be a little brighter than today." Maddie nodded, hugging her backpack, and walked to the small room prepared for her. Before closing the door, she glanced back. Her eyes met Jonathan's. She didn't speak, only gave a small, hesitant nod. Jonathan returned her gesture with a gentle nod of his own. That was enough to calm her racing thoughts, to pull her away from the urge to run. Later, in the study, Jonathan stood by the window, watching the tree branches sway in the night breeze. Quiet settled over the house, but inside him, a storm of purpose and determination had begun. Jonathan dialed the number of an old colleague from the police force. Even before the first ring finished, he already knew what had to be done. As soon as the call connected, he spoke in a short, decisive tone. "I need to reopen the case of Grace Miller." He hung. Jonathan rang the bell. After a moment, Frank Donovan appeared. His white shirt was wrinkled, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung to him. He froze for a beat, then smirked. "What are you doing back here?" Jonathan stood tall, voice low and firm. "To talk about Grace, and the car, with the tampered brakes." Frank gave a dry laugh, leaning against the doorframe. "You think a millionaire like you is any cleaner than the rest of us?" Jonathan stepped forward half a pace, eyes locked on Frank. "You killed Grace for the money." The air thickened. Frank clenched his jaw. "Watch your words, Reed. Your wife is dead. Have you decided who to blame yet? Don't bring your grief into my house." Jonathan held back his rage, speaking slowly, each word deliberate. "Mrs. Clara has the video from this afternoon. Detective Santos has reopened the case. The technical report shows the brake line was cut, and your timeline doesn't add up. Do you want to explain that here, or in court?" Heels clicked sharply in the hallway. Fiona Blake appeared behind Frank, her tight red dress flawless, her makeup perfect, but her eyes betrayed panic. She glanced at Jonathan, then turned to Frank, voice low but steel-edged. "Frank, stop this. If this comes out, you'll drag me down with you." Frank hissed under his breath. "Shut up, Fiona." She bit her lip and stared directly at Jonathan. "What do you want? You already took the girl. Now you want this house too." Jonathan did not move. "I want the truth, and safety for the child." A heavy silence fell. Frank turned his face away, avoiding Jonathan's gaze, fingers tightening unconsciously on the edge of the doorframe, white from pressure. Jonathan knew he wouldn't get a confession tonight. He stepped back, leaving one final sentence behind. "Get a lawyer. Next time, we talk in court." He turned and walked away. Behind him, Fiona's shaken whisper slipped through. "What did you do to that car?" The door slammed shut, burying the question inside. That afternoon, Martha took Alex and Maddie to the nearby supermarket. Maddie clutched her blue backpack, walking close beside the cart, while Alex pushed it silently, glancing sideways now and then to make sure she wasn't tired. In the crowded dairy aisle, Maddie stopped in front of the cookie shelf. Her eyes lit up at a small bear-shaped pack. "I like this one," she said softly, as if afraid to upset anyone. "Take it," Alex replied flatly. "Dad won't be mad." A sharp scent of perfume drifted past. Fiona stood behind them, arms folded, smirking. "So you ran off to the millionaire's house for good food and nice clothes. You think that makes you better now?" Maddie flinched, stepping back. Martha quickly placed a hand on her shoulder, voice steady. "No one talks to children like that here." Fiona rolled her eyes, lips pressed together. "You don't even know who she is. A beggar. My family already taught her a lesson." Maddie lowered her head, clutching the cookie bag until it crumpled. Alex stepped forward, placing himself between Fiona and Maddie. His voice was quiet but firm. "Don't touch my sister again." Fiona froze. Alex didn't step back. His gaze stayed fixed, eyes darkening. "You have no right to come near her. If you scare her again, I'll call security." Martha tilted her head. A young store manager, Lewis, approached politely but firmly. "Miss, if this is a personal dispute, I'll have to ask you to take it outside. There are children here." Fiona bit her lip, shot one last annoyed glance, then turned on her heels. Her perfume trailed behind like a faint scratch in the air. Maddie hadn't even exhaled when Alex pushed the cookie bag into her hands. "Hold on to it. Eat it at home." Tears brimming, Jonathan rang the bell. After a moment, Frank Donovan appeared. His white shirt was wrinkled, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung to him. He froze for a beat, then smirked. "What are you doing back here?" Jonathan stood tall, voice low and firm. "To talk about Grace, and the car, with the tampered brakes." Frank gave a dry laugh, leaning against the doorframe. "You think a millionaire like you is any cleaner than the rest of us?" Jonathan stepped forward half a pace, eyes locked on Frank. "You killed Grace for the money." The air thickened. Frank clenched his jaw. "Watch your words, Reed. Your wife is dead. Have you decided who to blame yet? Don't bring your grief into my house." Jonathan held back his rage, speaking slowly, each word deliberate. "Mrs. Clara has the video from this afternoon. Detective Santos has reopened the case. The technical report shows the brake line was cut, and your timeline doesn't add up. Do you want to explain that here, or in court?" Heels clicked sharply in the hallway. Fiona Blake appeared behind Frank, her tight red dress flawless, her makeup perfect, but her eyes betrayed panic. She glanced at Jonathan, then turned to Frank, voice low but steel-edged. "Frank, stop this. If this comes out, you'll drag me down with you." Frank hissed under his breath. "Shut up, Fiona." She bit her lip and stared directly at Jonathan. "What do you want? You already took the girl. Now you want this house too." Jonathan did not move. "I want the truth, and safety for the child." A heavy silence fell. Frank turned his face away, avoiding Jonathan's gaze, fingers tightening unconsciously on the edge of the doorframe, white from pressure. Jonathan knew he wouldn't get a confession tonight. He stepped back, leaving one final sentence behind. "Get a lawyer. Next time, we talk in court." He turned and walked away. Behind him, Fiona's shaken whisper slipped through. "What did you do to that car?" The door slammed shut, burying the question inside. That afternoon, Martha took Alex and Maddie to the nearby supermarket. Maddie clutched her blue backpack, walking close beside the cart, while Alex pushed it silently, glancing sideways now and then to make sure she wasn't tired. In the crowded dairy aisle, Maddie stopped in front of the cookie shelf. Her eyes lit up at a small bear-shaped pack. "I like this one," she said softly, as if afraid to upset anyone. "Take it," Alex replied flatly. "Dad won't be mad." A sharp scent of perfume drifted past. Fiona stood behind them, arms folded, smirking. "So you ran off to the millionaire's house for good food and nice clothes. You think that makes you better now?" Maddie flinched, stepping back. Martha quickly placed a hand on her shoulder, voice steady. "No one talks to children like that here." Fiona rolled her eyes, lips pressed together. "You don't even know who she is. A beggar. My family already taught her a lesson." Maddie lowered her head, clutching the cookie bag until it crumpled. Alex stepped forward, placing himself between Fiona and Maddie. His voice was quiet but firm. "Don't touch my sister again." Fiona froze. Alex didn't step back. His gaze stayed fixed, eyes darkening. "You have no right to come near her. If you scare her again, I'll call security." Martha tilted her head. A young store manager, Lewis, approached politely but firmly. "Miss, if this is a personal dispute, I'll have to ask you to take it outside. There are children here." Fiona bit her lip, shot one last annoyed glance, then turned on her heels. Her perfume trailed behind like a faint scratch in the air. Maddie hadn't even exhaled when Alex pushed the cookie bag into her hands. "Hold on to it. Eat it at home." Tears brimming, Maddie whispered, "Thank you, Alex." He looked a little embarrassed, turned away, but secretly lifted her backpack to make it lighter. Late that evening, Jonathan returned to Roxbury. Martha recounted the supermarket incident briefly. He listened, eyes softening as he noticed Alex placing the cookie bag on the table before pretending to tie his shoelaces. Jonathan nodded in thanks and stepped out to the porch to collect the mail. On the doorstep lay a brown-wrapped package, no sender indicated. He carried it inside, used a box cutter to slit the edge, and found an old folder inside clipped with a handwritten note. He pulled out the papers. The first page read, "Accident Report, Grace Miller, Original." Jonathan's eyes skimmed through the sections, stopping at a technical note blurred in the previous copy. The break line clearly showed evidence of being cut. The attached photographs were far clearer. The small note contained only one slanted line in dark blue ink. "If you want the truth, ask Tony Ramirez." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. He read it again to make sure he hadn't misread. Tony Ramirez, never mentioned in the file. Local rumor had it he ran an underground casino and loan shark business, feared by most. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, gripping the note tightly. He looked at the ceiling, then called Santos. "I just received an original copy of the accident report. And a name. Tony Ramirez." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Santos spoke slowly. "Now we know our next direction." Jonathan hung up, opened his laptop, and a few minutes later received a message from her, an address of an old bar in the north of the city, along with a phone number. "He usually sits there. Be careful." Jonathan drove straight to the location. Halyard's bar was dimly lit, its yellow lights muted. At the far end of the room, a middle-aged man with neatly trimmed stubble and a black shirt looked like someone who lived between streets and gambling halls. He looked up as Jonathan approached. "I'm Tony Ramirez," the man said, voice hoarse but clear. "Detective Santos said you'd come looking for me," Tony Ramirez said as Jonathan pulled out a chair, wasting no time. "I want to know why your name appeared in Dr. Grace Miller's accident file." Tony glanced at his glass, letting out a dry laugh. "You came to the right man, but I don't do charity. I talk. No recordings. If you agree, we continue." Jonathan placed his phone face down on the table, hands clasped. "I'm listening." Tony leaned on his elbows, eyes fixed on Jonathan, weighing his resolve. "Grace didn't die by accident. Frank wanted peace of mind. He needed me to erase the trail. He owed my gambling hall and promised to pay if I cleared him a clean path." Jonathan's grip tightened on the edge of the chair. "What trail?" Tony answered flatly. "The brakes. A guy at the garage loosened the tube and sliced a thin line to make it look like wear. I told him to wipe the repair logs, then had Gordon Hale clean up the paperwork. I never touched the car myself. I only erased the documents. That's it." Jonathan drew a deep breath, keeping his voice steady. "Why are you telling me this?" Tony smirked. "Because a child was thrown onto the street. I have a daughter too. And because Frank didn't pay all his debt. I hate men who are both cowards and liars." Jonathan placed a thin envelope on the table. "This is for your statement. The rest will come when you testify in court." Tony eyed the envelope but didn't touch it. "I'm not selling myself to you. I'll take you to the door. Nothing more. The rest, you walk yourself. Do you want the name of the guy at the garage or not?" Jonathan nodded. Tony scribbled a name and address on a napkin and pushed it over. He stood up. "Go out through the kitchen. Someone's been watching you since you walked in." As Tony turned, Jonathan noticed two men in dark coats at the entrance, eyes sweeping the room in steady intervals. He didn't pause. Moving quickly, he slipped past the sink area and pushed through the emergency exit. Footsteps scraped behind him and a sharp "hey" rang out, but he was already in the side parking lot. Jonathan unlocked his car, slid in, and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, one of the men burst out the door, pointing, but Jonathan pressed the gas, darted through a narrow alley, turned twice, then merged into traffic. His heart pounded, hands firm on the wheel. He called Santos. "I found Tony. He confirmed the brake tampering and gave me the name of the garage and Hale. I'm being tailed. I'm heading home now." "Go straight home," Santos replied firmly. "I'll send patrol units around your area." Under subpoena, Tony Ramirez took the stand, dressed in a dark shirt, his gaze steady and unflinching. Turner rose, starting with the evidence. Video from Linda's doorbell camera played, showing Frank shoving Maddie, Fiona pulling her toward the gate. Next came the original accident report, photos of the brake system with razor-thin cuts, and repair invoices logged at suspicious hours. Turner moved to the witness stand, voice clear. Mr. Frank Donovan, do you deny the hundreds of thousands of dollars you owed at Ramirez's casino? Frank glanced at Tony, then looked down. I didn't, he stammered, sweat beading on his temple. Turner shifted to Tony. Please repeat your testimony. Tony nodded. Frank came to me. He owed money. He asked me to erase the paperwork about the brake repairs. A lawyer named Gordon Hale handled the documents to make them look legitimate. The courtroom stirred. Turner called Linda. She spoke calmly and in detail. The kitchen window faced the wooden gate. The doorbell camera had recorded everything with dates and times, including the fact that only 10 days after the funeral, Fiona had moved into Grace's house. Finally, Turner turned to Jonathan. He stepped forward, placing a thin envelope on the table, and unfolded Anna's letter. My wife wrote that if the day ever came when Dr. Grace's daughter needed help, I should protect her. She once met a little blonde-haired girl, full of life, and wished that smile would never fade. I happened to meet Maddie at the wooden gate. I don't know if this was destiny or simply a promise I had to keep, but from that moment, I chose to stand with the child. The room fell silent. Judge Coleman gave a small nod, signaling Turner. We would like to invite Maddie to speak, Turner said, turning to Jonathan and then to the girl. Only if you feel ready. Maddie stood, hands gripping the edge of the table. The cream-colored handkerchief, embroidered with the letter A, still peeked from her pocket. She looked straight ahead, voice trembling but clear. My mom didn't deserve what happened. You took her away from me. I just want my mom not to hurt anymore. I want to be in a place where grown-ups don't yell and push me out into the street. A chair scraped softly in the back row. Alex lowered his head, clenching his fists. Martha gently touched his shoulder, reminding him to breathe steadily. The defense faltered. Fiona tried to shift blame, claiming she had only been swept along, but the warehouse video destroyed her excuses. Frank switched tactics, calling it an accident, negligence. But the technical report proved otherwise. Additional testimony from the garage confirmed signs of tampering in the brake system. Judge Coleman wrote quickly, then looked up, gaze moving from the defendants to Maddie. Steady and firm, she spoke. The court has reviewed the evidence in full and has heard the testimony of witnesses and all parties involved. Defendants Frank Donovan and Fiona Blake are sentenced to long-term imprisonment for charges related to endangerment, obstruction of justice, and child abuse. Tony Ramirez and Gordon Hale are found guilty as accomplices, with sentencing according to their specific charges, detailed in the written judgment. Frank slumped into his chair, eyes vacant. Fiona clutched her handbag, her lipstick smudged. In the back row, Clara exhaled, hands finally steady. Tony said nothing, giving only a small nod, as if half a burden had lifted. Judge Coleman turned to Jonathan and Maddie regarding custody. In consideration of the best interests of the child, the current environment, and the evidence presented, the court grants temporary custody, transitioning into permanent custody, to Mr. Jonathan Reed. This ruling takes effect immediately. Maddie turned to find Jonathan. He gave a faint smile, eyes glistening under the table. Alex clenched his fist, whispering just loud enough for Maddie to hear, "Let's go home, little sister." The gavel struck. The courtroom doors opened, letting in a rush of new air. Stepping out, they faced something even greater, learning how to become a true family. The sound of Judge Coleman's gavel still echoed in Jonathan's mind. A dark chapter had closed, and another had begun. Months passed. The once vast, cold Roxbury estate gradually grew warm. Breakfast was no longer silent. Alex and Maddie sat together at the small library table, doing math while bickering. Alex frowned when Maddie wrote too slowly. Maddie pouted, chin in hand. Jonathan walked by, smiling at their small quarrels, a rhythm of two children learning to care for each other. "Dad, Maddie's handwriting is awful," Alex complained. "It's not awful. I write just like Mom used to," Maddie protested, springing up with her notebook. Jonathan smiled, sitting down between them. "Then that's a good thing. Any handwriting written with love is beautiful." The words made them stop, glance at each other, then laugh as if they had just lost a small battle to their father. On a quiet weekend, Jonathan drove Alex and Maddie to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. 2 bouquets of white carnations sat in the back seat. Martha had prepared everything that morning, reminding him to bring an embroidered scarf Anna once used, to be placed beside the flowers. Grace Miller's grave lay next to Anna's in Provence. Jonathan laid down the flowers, hands trembling slightly. Kneeling, he smoothed Anna's headstone. "Anna, I've kept my promise. The little one is safe now." Maddie stood behind him, clutching his coat. She placed a smaller bouquet on Grace's grave and whispered softly, "Mom, I still think of you every day. I'm not afraid anymore because I have Dad and Alex." Jonathan wrapped his arms around both children, pulling them close. He lifted his gaze to the soft gray sky, feeling for the first time in years that his heart had grown lighter. That afternoon, the garden behind the house filled with sunlight. Maddie ran among the flower beds, blonde hair flying, radiant and carefree, nothing like the child who once sobbed before a cold wooden gate. Jonathan watched from the porch, remembering Anna's words, "I hope I will always see that smile." Alex stepped from behind, quietly taking Maddie's hand. "Now we really are a family," he said. Maddie squeezed his hand and nodded firmly, her smile shining with trust. Jonathan stood still, letting the image of his children holding hands etch into his heart. At last, he and his children had stepped out of the shadows, finding light through love, justice, and healing. From a child abandoned at a wooden gate to a home full of warmth and laughter, this story proves that love and justice endure. Evil may hide in the shadows, but truth and care will always bring light, and those who do right are rewarded. If you liked this video, support us by subscribing, liking, and commenting. Your one click inspires us to create more content.